Hey, it's Matt Brown from Matt Brown's Guitar Studio in the band Dead Parade, and a lot of you have been asking about gear, and it's always a hot topic, with musicians usually, what gear do you use and all of that, and I'm always kind of reluctant to talk about it because ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think gear is that important, I could plug into just about any guitar, any kind of amp, and knowing how to set it up just right, I'm probably going to get roughly the same tone that sounds like me and what people perceive and know as my sound. So what I hope to give you information wise with this lesson is not information on just what I use, but how to best select the gear that's going to be best for you, ideal for your playing on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so I'm going to start with picks in the basics. I always use the same picks regardless of what kind of guitar I'm playing or the style of music I'm playing. So I always use the Dunlop Tortex picks, and usually in the past these picks were green of the .88 millimeter variety. Now they're this kind of there's this new variety that's kind of like a pitch black version. It's still the same thickness, but it's a slightly different I think look and obviously, and it feels a little bit different in your hand. So I think maybe it's a little bit different kind of plastic, and there's slightly, maybe it's just in my head, but maybe a little bit less give when I'm doing like tremolo picking compared to the green ones. So maybe, like I said, maybe this is just in my head, but that seems to be the difference, is there's a little bit less give to this material of plastic. So with picks, tone-wise, the kind of material and the thickness and the shape and whether it has a point on the bottom or not are kind of the big things to look for. And I like a rounded tip, no point. I don't find that the pointed tip really helps with tremolo picking enough for that to be warranted. And if it does have a point, I think the tone is a little bit weak because there's less surface area of the pick hitting the strings. So also, if there's no give to the pick when it hits the strings, I think the tone is a little bit kind of harsh and forced, and also I think it tends to wobble a little bit in your hands in a kind of a negative way if there's no give to the pick, which for me personally kind of slows me down a little bit. So that's why I use the .88 millimeters for my pick, and that goes for both bass and guitar. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about what kind of strings I like to use. I'll start with electric guitar, and the reason why I use what I use is purely, not purely practical, but mainly practical. And these days you can get either Ernie balls or D'Addarios in bulk. So the choice to me financially, since I go through tons and tons of strings, is, well, I got to go with one of those too. And in my opinion, the D'Addarios are infinitely better than Ernie ball strings. The Ernie ball strings feel a little bit like coarse and tend to like grind on the frets with a new set of strings. And I don't know, they tend to have like this kind of like almost like a greasier kind of feel to them that I don't really care for. And also tone-wise, I can't say that I've noticed a whole lot of a difference between the strings, but I will say that the D'Addarios seem to stretch out and get into tune, and the intonation with them is a little bit more stable, it's equally stable, but it takes less time to stretch the strings out, is what I'll say. So I go with 9-gauge strings. Anything bigger than that in standard tuning, and I feel like the guitar is playing me and not me playing the guitar. So if you want more information on like string gauges, just check out I did a lesson on tuning down and setting up your guitar, so check that one out for more information on that. So acoustic strings. With a steel string acoustic, I use typically either phosphor bronze or just bronze, depending on what kind of tone I'm going for. It's like, do I want more of a punch, or do I want kind of more of a smooth, I guess more vintage kind of sound is the choice there between those string types. I always use 12s no matter what. I don't think an acoustic guitar is meant to be played like an electric guitar. So, you know, if you want to, you know, like play like Slash, for example, like he does on acoustic and be bending the strings all over the place, you know, you pretty much have to play with 10s or like 11s, but then I feel like the tone is just so weak, you know, it's like that, you get the rubber bands on a shoebox kind of tone, so I always go with 12s. Alright, next up I will talk about the guitars I use and why. So this is my main guitar. This is a 2001 PRS Custom 24. And so I use this guitar as my main guitar for a few different reasons. Having a guitar with 2 humbuckers is pretty much an essential for most of what I play. I'm either going to be using the bridge pickup or the neck pickup or the middle pickup selection on a guitar with 3 humbuckers for, I would say, like 98% of the tones I do. So, you know, this is my, I guess, my favorite guitar with 2 humbuckers. So one of the reasons for that are the pickups that are put into this. It's the Dragon and the, this is the Dragon bass and the FHS or Hot Fat Scream. And I like, kind of my tone is generated by using really high output pickups, kind of as hot as you can get without going to active pickups like an EMG or something like that. And then what I do with the amp is I don't use a whole lot of gain. You know, the gain's only maybe at like, you know, 9 or 10 o'clock. So that's kind of, I guess, a trick to my tone is using, you know, really high output pickups with low gain settings on the amp. The other thing I like about this guitar a lot is, since it's a 24 fret guitar and the scale length isn't crazy long, the frets aren't too far apart, which for me, I don't have very big hands, so it just really helps with, you know, big chords or stretches, and even if I'm not doing that stuff, this guitar just feels so much more comfortable for me to play than any other electric guitar. The tuners too are amazing. These guitars don't really go out of tune at all. I think the only tuner design that I've found that works maybe a tiny bit better is the Kluson locking tuner system, which I have on my GNL guitar. So this is my number 2 guitar with humbuckers. This is a Gibson Les Paul Standard from, I believe this is a 1996. So I've pretty much played this guitar into the ground. This was my number 1 for many, many years, and I've had to replace just about everything on it at this point. The pickups have been replaced. You know, like I was saying before, I like really hot pickups, so other than the Paul Reed Smith, you know, Dragon HFS, I like the Seymour Duncan pickups. This is a Jazz in the neck and JB in the bridge, both, you know, pretty hot pickups. These days, fortunately, Gibson is making higher quality guitars than they were in the 90s. Like I said, the switches have all cracked and broken off. The pickguard too, all of the knobs. The bridge I've replaced with the Tone Pros bridge, which is now, I believe, what they use standard on all their stuff. The tuners have been replaced with just, you know, tighter gear ratios. So this guitar's been refretted too. So just basically the body and the neck are the only thing that's original. The nut's been replaced too. So Gibson, not exactly the most, I guess, durable guitar that you're going to encounter. Like I've had the Paul Reed Smith and probably put as many miles on it as I have with the Gibson, and it's held up way better than the Gibson has. So quality-wise, PRS is just an infinitely better guitar than a Gibson. So why do I have this guitar? I mainly use this guitar for overdubs now in the studio, for when I am recording a real, you know, aggressive guitar sound and I want to overdub another aggressive kind of humbucker sound to the other, you know, side of the stereo spectrum. So that's pretty much all I use it for, and sometimes use it for, you know, like a backup guitar live, and I guess occasionally for some clean sounds if I want like that. I guess the middle pickup setting, or combined pickup setting on Les Pauls is just, I guess for me, for most clean guitar tones, I guess usually what I go with on recordings. It kind of sounds right to me. So this is my third electric guitar that I own, and a lot of people think this is like a custom built or like something I built myself, but it actually is not. It is just a G&L Legacy, the standard model, and this one is, I think, it's a mid-90s, so I think it's a 95, if I remember correctly. So the neck had gotten so bad and like the frets were so worn that I just decided to replace it. It was originally a maple neck, but I like the sound of rosewood better, so I have basically rosewood on every guitar that I own. The pickups, a lot of people have seen the email about those, and they are the lace sensor set. There's a blue, a silver, and a red, and I originally got the idea for using this pickup set from the Smashing Pumpkins' first two albums. Just I've always really liked Billy Corgan's Strat tones on those albums, and you know, that just kind of like sparkling clean tone that's kind of, it sounds like a Strat, but you know, something sort of different, since these are kind of like humbuckery type Strat tones. So I don't know, I just think it works really nicely for clean tones, and then for like aggressive rock and you know, something that's not, you know, a true humbucker sound, this red one is really aggressive and just, you know, has a lot of bite to it. You know, just you know, listen to Billy Corgan, those old Smashing Pumpkins albums, or you know, live shows, whatever. So this guitar, I mainly use it for overdubs, and the reason being is that, you know, most of the time you're going to want to have two fairly different guitar tones on the left and right hands of the stereo spectrum. So there's a reason why so many bands have you know, had one guitarist playing a Les Paul, the other one playing a Strat. You know, I just mentioned Smashing Pumpkins, Pearl Jam. Take your pick out of, you know, a trillion 90s or 70s bands, lots of bands today as well. It just works, you know, to have the Strat, kind of the biting single coil sound on one side, and then, or maybe a Telecaster as well. I don't own one, but it would be nice if I did. Kind of serves the same general purpose, and then like a Les Paul, Paul Reed Smith, whatever, something with humbuckers on the other side. Alright, so I'm going to get into amps next. So this little friend is my amp. This is a Mesa Boogie Mark V, and this is the 25 watt edition. And it's kind of funny, over the years I've had 100 watt amps, several of them. I've had a VHT Pitbull, the Mesa Boogie Dual Rectifier, Marshall JCM 900, Solid State Marshall, a Marshall Combo. I had a Mesa Boogie Dual Caliber, which was a 50 watt amp, and I've always found that 100 watt amps are always too much amp unless you're playing like an arena or a huge theater size show. And even then, that level of stage volume is, for most people, not even necessary these days, because you know, most people, like I use in-ear monitors, so having loud stage volume isn't even necessary. And if you're playing like you know, Wrigley Field or whatever, so I go for trying to get the most headroom by just blasting the amp as much as I possibly can. So that's why I use low wattage amps these days, and I can get, you know, the best possible tone at a club, you know, a small club up to a large, you know, theater, which is, you know, the biggest I've ever played. So I think the Mark V and Mark amps by Mesa Boogie in general are the best, and that company is the best for a few reasons. I don't think you're going to have better customer support and repair service, especially if you're touring. You know, you're going to want, if something's going wrong with your amp, get it fixed and get it repaired pretty quickly. So there's, you know, good authorized repair people all around, or you can send it directly to the company, and the turnaround time is pretty good. I've not had the same experience with smaller companies, just because they don't have the manpower to handle the customer service requests that come in. So I guess, though, the big reason why I like this amp is the EQ versatility that you have with a Mesa Boogie, and that's mainly through, you have this graphic EQ that you can either turn on or off, and you have the EQ controls on the amp in front. So For me, having EQ flexibility and really being able to like minutely dial in the EQ is probably one of the most important factors for me in an amp. The other would be just, you know, kind of the character or how smooth or how blocky, I guess, the distorted sounds or overdriven sounds are. So in that regard, this amp is perfect. You know, it's got the right amount of bark and bite, but so it's not completely smooth like maybe, you know, that was sort of a problem I ran into with the VHT amp I used to have. And it's a little smoother, I'd say, than most Marshalls. So, you know, it's just kind of the perfect sound for me. The clean tone too, I've always liked the Fender clean tones, and I think what Mesa Boogie did was just kind of maybe took that classic Fender clean tone sound and just perfected it. I think the Fender clean tone is a little bit harsh, if I had to be, you know, critical of it, and this is just kind of a fatter, warmer sound, I'd say, that you can get with this amp. And it does have kind of like this fat switch that does kind of, I think, increase like the bass and low mid presence and just warms things up a lot. So I don't know. These days, get yourself a low wattage tube amp, maybe something like this, or you know, Mesa Boogie makes some other models in low wattage. You know, maybe some of the other companies do as well these days. So get yourself a low wattage tube amp would be my recommendation. So last and, in my opinion, least, let's talk about effects pedals. So I don't use a whole lot, is why I say, you know, last and least. Pretty much for most gigs that I use in most recordings, I'm just taking an overdrive pedal, a wah pedal, and a delay pedal. And that I can pretty much get away with doing 99.9% of what I do. Reverb I'm using comes from the amp. So I just use the overdrive on whatever channel I'm using to boost my signal for solos, and I use the Boss Super Overdrive. And the reason for that is, you know, it kind of has a classic true bypass sound, kind of like a TS9, but you have way more versatility as far as how much gain you can dial into your sound. So with a TS9, you don't have a whole lot. You know, it's kind of like you can get that Stevie Ray Vaughan kind of bite, or, you know, do what Kirk Hammett used to do and put, like, you know, just that little extra bite on the solo. But with the Boss Super Overdrive, it's a yellow pedal. You can really dial in a lot of gain with it. So I like that versatility. For delay, I'm using the Boss DD5. It's a digital delay, and I pretty much just use that to fatten up the sound for solos, you know, just a little bit of echo. Usually I'm not soloing over another guitar player, usually it's just bass and drums, so I kind of need to fatten up the sound a little bit and, you know, give it a little bit more space, so I guess the bottom end doesn't fall out, you know, when I'm not playing rhythm guitar and I go to a solo. So the wah, I just use a tried and true Crybaby wah. I just think it's the best. It's, you know, like I said, a little boring, but tried and true. So yeah, so some of the other effects that I have used on occasion, I do have a Boss chorus, I have a Boss, let's see, in Ottawa, I have the Boss phase shifter, which, you know, the other option with this kind of pedal for phase is the phase 90, and I just think, you know, again, there's a lot more versatility and options that you can do with this one, so use that. For most of the Nirvana stuff, I've been using that Boss chorus pedal. The Poly chorus is another chorus pedal that sounds really nice, but I like the Boss one a little bit better. A little more organic sounding, I think. So that really does it. Most of the other effects I've ever used, like if I have to use flanger, I just use like Pro Tools plugins these days. You know, because there's so many options, and I figure if I'm not going to use something live, there's no sense in buying a pedal, because I'm never going to really use it ever, you know, it's just going to collect dust. So yeah, those are my thoughts on gear. If you guys have any you know, questions about, you know, I have this much money and I'm looking for this kind of sound, what kind of gear should I get? I'd be more than happy to answer your questions about that kind of stuff. So just leave me a comment in the comment section. I'm usually pretty good about answering that stuff. So thanks a lot for watching. Hope I didn't bore you all to tears with this. And I am Matt Brown from Matt Brown's Guitar Studio and Dead Parade. Alright, I'll see you guys around for more lessons in the new year.